No doubt you've heard the biggest story in the news about the escalation of the conflict between Israel and Palestine on the Gaza Strip. They call it a war. Well, one side has the fourth largest army in the world and the latest technology being aided by the US with the largest, most powerful military the world has ever known. The other side has no military at all. But regardless of this inequality, there is another truth about this conflict, a fact far more important but always ignored by Western media. Let's peel back the layers of this complicated onion to reveal this hidden, always ignored and forgotten fact. Israel is illegally occupying Palestine land and has been since 1967. During the Six-Day War in 1967, Israel took Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, and Israel has been annexing Palestinian territory ever since. Now, when I say this land grab is illegal, I don't mean it's just immoral and a violation of human rights, which of course it is. I mean it's against international law. The UN has passed over 75 resolutions condemning Israel's invasion and occupation of Palestine. The UN Criminal Court has declared Israel's treatment of the Palestinians a war crime. Amnesty International has listed Israel officially as an apartheid state. When the Western media uses words as it's complicated, it's a conflict, or war, they're deliberately misleading the public about the true nature of this Israel-Palestinian relationship and shielding Israel from facing consequences for its crimes, war crimes. But how did we get here? Why is America protecting Israel from the same pressure, the international pressure and scrutiny that forced South Africa to change its racist and apartheid policies? Why isn't the UN Security Council trying to stop Israel from continuing its war crimes against Palestinians after passing so many resolutions condemning these actions? And more importantly, what will become of the Palestinian people? The Palestinians living in the West Bank are living in an apartheid rule where every aspect of their life is controlled by an invading military power, and they are being pushed out of their homes by Israel and forced to flee into refugee camps in Jordan or Lebanon. The Palestinians living in Gaza are under an Israeli blockade that does not allow food, medicine, humanitarian supplies. It doesn't allow anything in or out of Gaza. And access to the sea, the fishing, is limited to 50 meters from shore. It is virtually an outdoor prison. Israel has also destroyed the water distillation plants in Gaza, and 97% of the water is undrinkable. In order to understand the current situation, we must briefly look at the history of events that brought us to this modern-day catastrophe to the Palestinian people. For centuries, the Jordan Valley, extending throughout the Middle East, was part of the Ottoman Empire. After World War I, England took control of this area. The inhabitants, 93% Arab, 4% Jewish, and 3% Christian, lived in general peace. Britain ruled but allowed autonomy. New villages and towns sprung up, and it became an area of agriculture and commerce. During this time in Europe, however, Jews were not often welcomed in the so-called Christian countries. Many Jews found safe haven in the Middle East. In Palestine, they were welcomed and accepted by the Arabs living there. And then came World War II and the Nazi Holocaust, which killed 6 million Jews. After the war, despite these atrocities they had suffered, Jews were still mostly unwelcome in Europe. Again, the Palestinians opened their doors to the Jewish refugees. But another movement was taking place simultaneously. The Zionist movement. Many Jews believing God has promised an ancestral homeland only to Jews. And when they arrived from Europe, they had no intention of sharing or living peacefully with their neighbors. They committed acts of violence towards the Palestinians and began confiscating land only for themselves. They also coordinated attacks, sabotage, and rebellion against the British. The British, no longer able to effectively govern, saw that the end was near. English troops and personnel left Palestine. However, sympathy for the Jewish plight remained strong among members of the British Parliament, with key members from the England's government and Jewish leaders, Israel in 1948 became a country. Nearly 70% of the Palestinian territory was given to Israel by the UN. The first order of the new state of Israel was to expel all Palestinians. Over 750,000 Palestinians whose family had been living on the land for centuries were forced out of their homes and into refugee camps in neighboring Jordan and Lebanon. This tragedy is known as the Nakba. It is against the law to mention the Nakba in Israel. When Palestinians and the surrounding countries fought back, Israel, with America's help, easily won this war and then proceeded to take and occupy all of Palestine. The UN called this a war crime and ordered Israel to withdraw from Palestine. And as we now know, Israel never intends to give this land back. Also in 1967, Israel launched an attack against Egypt and its neighbors and took more land belonging to the Palestinians, and then began a systematic displacement of Palestinian families from their homes. Palestinian villages were razed to make room for illegal Jewish settlements. If I'm Jewish and I live in New York, for example, I can go to Israel, even if I've never been there before in my life. I can prove my Jewish heritage, and then I have the right to claim a home. I can move into a home that belongs to a Palestinian family, and maybe that family's lived there for centuries. It doesn't matter. And Palestinians live under this fear every day. Palestinians living in the occupation in the West Bank are treated less than human, not allowed to use the same roads as Jews, segregated areas for Palestinian businesses, homes, restaurants, nightly home raids by the IDF, the Israel Army, arresting children, indiscriminate killings, checkpoints for Palestinians to move from town to town. And in the Gaza Strip, the Palestinians are trapped by an Israel blockade that does not let anything in or out. Hamas, a Palestinian governmental organization with a militant wing, formed in 1987, 20 years after the start of Israel's illegal occupation of Palestine, launched an aggressive attack last week against Israel. This was short-lived because Hamas and the Palestinians have no army, no navy, no air force, they have nothing. They rely on homemade bottle rockets and weapons smuggled from them from Lebanon or Iran. The Western media over and over repeated the same thing. Unprovoked, unprovoked, unprovoked attack. 56 years of occupation, apartheid rule, land theft, jailing children for throwing rocks at tanks, killing of children, absolute complete humiliation, and these attacks are unprovoked. Even by international law, the Palestinians have a right to defend themselves and resist this occupation. The UN clearly states this. When the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto during the Second World War resisted and fought their German oppressors, was this not seen as heroic and righteous? So what was Israel's response to Hamas's attack? An inappropriate escalation of Israel's violence toward the Palestinians. Over 100,000 Israel citizens took to the streets to demand the government pull back the annihilation of Gaza. They knew it was genocide, and that's completely what it is, an annihilation of a people. The Israel Air Force began a bombing campaign that has lasted a week. Everything bombed. Residences, schools, ambulances, helpers, hospitals, without discrimination. Then the power and the water were cut off to all 2.3 million people living in Gaza. How long can a person survive without power? How about water? How about a child without water? This is nothing short of genocide. I am shocked as the world idly sits by at the prospect of over 2 million people losing their lives by a racist apartheid state. The US, Britain, and other European countries promised Israel unconditional support. What is this support? Sending weapons to kill civilians in Gaza. The Gaza has no army to defend itself. Israel calls it mowing the grass, which means wiping out everything and everyone living in Gaza.